Shalom, this is Amonute Tayac of Piscataway, Sophia Spiritualite, the AmaruKhan Miriyam, and we're here with a very interesting book. We're going to just read a little bit from here. I want to put this into the ley lines, give people something to think about in regards to who are, what are the qualities of the people of the feathers, the copper colored Aboriginals who were first on these lands. This is called the Iroquois Book of Rites. 9 times out of 10, if you are from the East Coast, basically anywhere on the East Coast, you more than likely came under the jurisdiction of the Iroquois. The Iroquois Federation, the actual incorporation documents are the actual foundation of the Constitution, to be quite honest. And they copied a lot of the order, the structure of the Iroquois Federation when they created their Senate and their House and their Congress and all of their stuff. And so I found this book, and we're just going to take a quick look at just a few things. First, we're going to read the preface. Okay. It's only 2 pages, and then we're going to go and read their laws, because you know how I am about laws. It's very important to understand how people carried about their business, and I think you'll find it interesting, as I found it interesting. So this is the preface. The Aboriginal composition now presented to the public has some peculiar claims on the attention of scholars. As a record, if we accept the chronology of its custodians, which there is no reason to question, it carries back the authentic history of Northern America to a date anterior by 50 years to the arrival of Columbus. Pause right there. They can only trace us back to 50 years before Columbus arrived. But when you hear how they do business, that's not even possible. But let's just keep going. Further than this, the plain and credible tradition of the Iroquois, confirmed by much other evidence, links them with the still earlier Allegui, or mound builders, as conquerors with the conquered. Thus, the annals of this portion of the continent need no longer begin with the landing of the first colonists, but can go back, like those of Mexico, Yucatan, and Peru, to a storied past of singular interest. This means that the past, that they've already found stuff that literally says there's no way that the people here came with Columbus. Okay? There were people already here. There was history already here. There was heritage already here. It didn't start with, and it didn't end with Columbus, and it didn't start with Columbus, okay? The chief value of the Book of Rites, however, is ethnological, and it is found in the light which it casts on the political and social life, as well as on the character and capacity of the people to whom it belongs. We see in them many of the traits which Tacitus discerned in our ancestors of the German forest, along with some of the qualities of a higher caste than any that he has delineated. What that is saying is the people of Germany, from the forest of Germany, share the same qualities as these Aboriginals. I just want you to think about that for a minute. How would that be possible? This is why I think I shared some clips from another book, or maybe I didn't. But this is why you had these ethnographers going around to these other countries trying to figure out how they had the same traditions as the Aboriginals here. This is also why I say we cannot, or we should not, treat people who don't look like us as if they do not have the same kind of heritage as we do, because if you look at the ethnography alone, they learn from us, or we learn from them, if you want to put it in that order. We share a common heritage. That's the best way to put it. We share a common heritage. No matter where it came from and who taught us, we share a common heritage. This is just a German. And the other book that I was looking at, he goes to Ireland, he goes to Russia, he goes all over the place trying to figure out how these people all are so similar. This is what the point is. We have more There's more in common between us as groups of people than there are things that are different. Okay? I mean, that's my conclusion. The love of peace, the sentiment of human brotherhood, the strong social and domestic affections, the respect for law, and the reverence for ancestral greatness, which are apparent in this Indian record and in the historical events which illustrate it, will strike most readers as new and unexpected developments. Why would it strike the readers as new and unexpected developments? Because when they tell the story of the quote unquote Indians, now he said Aboriginals. He said Aboriginals. He didn't say Indians. When they tell the story of the quote unquote Indians, it's always of how aggressive they are, how angry they are, how much fighting they do, how violent they are. Now, there's a group of people who meet all those qualifications, and they happen to be coming through our southern border right now. Not a political statement, a actual fact. So these Aboriginals, they're not those ones. Just keep that in mind when you're thinking about who's the Aboriginal to this land and who is pretending to be Aboriginal to this land. Now, he also in this page makes a distinction between the history of Mexico, Yucatan, and Peru. He distinguished the Aboriginals of North America, specifically of America, different from the ones of Mexico. Keep that in mind, because when you hear about who the Aboriginals are, he says that these are friendly, peace-loving people. That is the point of this. These are not angry people. These are not people who are always fighting. These are people who seek peace above all. There is a group of people who seek peace above all. They happen to be Hebrew Israelites, mostly. You got some angry ones right now, but when they come out of the anger, they be looking for peace. That is characteristic of the native Aboriginals to this land. Peace loving is a characteristic of our people, and everyone knows that, except for us, I guess. All right. The circumstances attending the composition of this record and its recent discovery are fully detailed in the introductory chapters. Also, and in the notes and appendix, such further explanations are given as the various allusions and occasional obscurities of the Indian work have seemed to require. It is proper to state the particulars comprised in the following pages respecting the traditions, the usages, and the language of the Iroquois, except such as are expressly stated to have been derived from books, have been gathered by the writer in the course of many visits made during several years past to their reservations in Canada and New York, as a matter of justice and also as an evidence of the authenticity of these particulars. The names of the informants whom he has been principally indebted are given in proper places with suitable acknowledgement and of the assistance received from each. He ventures to hope that in the book of information thus obtained, as well as the book of rights itself, the students of history and the science of man will find some new material of permanent interest and value. The science of man. We know the science of man is the arts. The arts being magic, okay? He thinks that this is going to be useful to magic. He didn't say that, but that's what that means. The science of man is magic. Everyone knows that except for us. Okay, so now let's go to the laws, because you know I happen to be a law person. And we're just gonna, I find some things very interesting here. All right. And this is a few pages, about 10, so settle in. All right. It is the custom of the officiating orator, while the chant is going on, to walk to and fro in the council house. Maybe I should explain that. A council house is basically, if you haven't done any Aboriginal research, well, in Maryland they're called long houses. So basically it's like the town center, like where people gather to have their meetings. And in Maryland we had long houses, so you would have multiple families, multiple groups living in like dormitory style housing with a big opening like in the middle for eating and for meetings and for stuff like that. That's how we lived. Okay. And also, if you just think about this one statement, this literally sounds like church, some kind of spiritual ceremony. Because while people are singing or chanting is singing. If you've listened to any of my daily prayers, they're all chanting, which sounds like singing. So while the people are chanting or singing, the officiating orator or the priest walks back and forth. And if you've watched any of the services, the priest walks back and forth. I'm not trying to relate this specifically to religion, but I just want you to understand what they're saying. It's not so obvious when you read the sentence until you actually picture it. So I'm giving you the picture of what this looks like. Now, it just so happens to verify my claims that there's so much stuff in this chapter that verifies my claims of who actually are the people, from the book. This also verifies who are the people from the book, who had the religion first, who was there when Jesus was crucified, where this crucifixion and all this stuff happened. All this stuff is verified in this book, in just this chapter. I think it's insane. So I'll make the reference to orthodoxy because I think it's the most relevant. So, and also remember, orthodoxy is a mirror image mostly of what they call now Orthodox Judaism. The churches are very much like the synagogues. The things are set up the same. So even orthodoxy has its roots in Judaism. And Judaism, of course, has its roots in Hebrews. Hebrews being and those rites being things that have been done since the beginning of time. So this is a very ancient practice. That's another point about this. This is an ancient practice. This doesn't just start when Jesus died. No, before Jesus died, he was in the temples, in the synagogues. They mirrored it off of that. So that's just something to keep in mind. This is the continuation of that tradition. This is not a separation of the old tradition from the new tradition. It's just under the new tradition, we have Jesus as our high priest. And under the old tradition, they had different high priests that were mostly Levites. If that helps people to understand what's going on a little better. That's just the first sentence. Let's keep going. When the hymn is finished, now he called it a chant, and then he says a hymn. Okay. When the hymn is finished, he breaks out into passionate invocation to their forefathers and a lament over the degeneracy of the times. This, as the French missionaries inform us, was a favorite topic of Indian speakers. Among the Iroquois, who could look back to an era of genuine statesmen and heroes, the authors of their constitution, this complaint must have had a peculiar force and sincerity. After this appeal to the founders of their state, there naturally followed an address to the council of the people reciting all the rules they decided on, which they thought would strengthen the house. Let me just comment on this. This other statement. Something just came to me. When they talk about the era of genuine statesmen and heroes, they're talking about their martyrs and their saints. They're invoking their martyrs and their saints to come and be of help to them. That's what that means. They're highly elevated people. They're martyrs and they're saints. So elevation, discussion of the martyrs and the saints, it did not start with orthodoxy. It does not end with orthodoxy. This is something our people always did. Okay. Let's keep going. By the house was meant, of course, the house of many hearths, to which liken their confederacy, meaning they're talking about all their different subgroups. The rules or laws which follow require some explanation that their full value may be understood. It requires explanation because the group of people doing this, they didn't understand this thought process. They were very unfamiliar with this way of organizing because they come from a wicked system. And so this system, which is a more pure system, is foreign to them. They're not being facetious. This is brand new to them. They don't understand this system, which is how you know the professional victims unit number 1 is masquerading as the actual people of the book, because this would be natural to them. And you will see as we go through these rules, these are things that are natural to a certain group of people in the Americas known, I call the Aboriginals, the original to this land, okay? The first law prescribes that when a chief dies, his office shall not perish with him. This is expressed in their metaphorical style by an injunction that the horns or insignia of office shall not be buried with the deceased chief, but shall be taken off at his death to be transferred to his successor. This rule is laid down in the most urgent and impressive terms. We should perhaps all perish if his office is buried with him in his grave. This systemic transmission of official rank was, in fact, the vital principle of their government. Listen, it is so important that the tradition of leadership continues, that this was ingrained into us. Now, where do you see this in the quote-unquote African American community? Many of y'all will remember seeing Bishop T.D. Jakes pass the reins on to his daughter for the women's thing, and she fell out on the floor and all of that, and that whole ceremony they did. That's how our people always done. The thing is not going to die with the person. If the person knows they're getting ready to take down, they pass that office to the next person. When a female artist knows that she's, coming out of her prime, she will pass the reins to the next generation of female artists. When Big Mama dies, the next Big Mama steps up. Typically, we have gotten away from that mostly, but that's what happens. When the matriarch passes, the next matriarch comes into action. Mostly, okay? So this is natural to our community. There are communities, lots of communities where this type of behavior is natural. And there are lots of communities where this type of nature is unnatural. Okay? This is the point of this discussion. To let you know who does this naturally, who's naturally picking successors, making sure that the family doesn't, what's that movie? Soul Food. What was that about? Big Mama was dying. They're trying to figure out who's going to take over the next role. They're trying to keep the tradition going. This is why they don't want you celebrating no holidays. They don't want you being around your family. They don't want y'all compromising, because then they can separate you from this philosophy. It's not separated from me, my family, because we still do this. But a lot of you all have, shunned your families and walked away from them, saying that you won't do this. You refuse to do this. And, it's unnatural to you. You are willingly giving up your inheritance when you don't behave in ways that are natural to your actual lineage. Just know that. When you go against your natural lineage, you are giving up your ability to inherit the inheritance. You're giving up your inheritance. You're surrendering it. Okay? Just like you have that guy, Soros. He is out of the picture, and what he passed the mantle on to his son. That's an imitation of what we do naturally. That's not a natural occurrence from him. And also, all the people that they quote unquote pass the reins to are all like mentally deficient. They don't have the skills to be as great as their fathers. That's not how we did on our families. When you pass the mantle on to the next generation, the person you pass it to had the capability of being as good as the one who had held that mantle previously. Every single time. And that person, with the support of the others in the family, they did their best to hold it together. Again, it's only recent development, since some of y'all found out you were Hebrew, that you gave up your inheritance of this tradition. Okay? It was in this system that their federal union differed from the frequent and transitory confederacies common among Indian tribes. Pause. This is why I said most of us are from the Iroquois Federation, because the other quote-unquote Indian tribes, they didn't have this. Who are these quote-unquote Indian tribes? They look very much like the people invading our southern border right now. Okay? Those are the ones who don't have this. But the ones who do have this are the Aboriginals. Just keep that in mind. Okay? In general, among nearly all the tribes, the rank of chief was personal. Why? Chief is the same as priest. The chief was the priest of the tribe. The chief was the priest of the tribe. There was always priest kings. So we had chief priest. Okay? And even chief is a name that is typically assigned to a priest. When you have titles of priest discussed, it's chief priest. It's the head priest. Okay? It was gained by the character and achievements of the individual, and it died with him. Hence, the government and policy, so far as they can be said to have had any, were always uncertain and fluctuating. No person understood the Indian usages better than Zeisberger. His biographer has well described the difference which existed in this respect between the Iroquois and their neighbors. The Algonquins, he writes, knew nothing of regular government. They had no system of polity or politics. There was no unity of action among them. The affairs, even of a single tribe, were managed in the loosest manner. After briefly but accurately delineating the Iroquois system of councils, he adds, thus they became both a political and military power among the Aboriginals. The influence of their league was felt everywhere, and their conquest extended in every direction. The principle that the chief dies but the office arrives, the regular transmission of rank, title, and authority by a method partly hereditary and partly elective, was a principle on which the life and strength of the Iroquois constitution depended. You know who else did this? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. You had Noah, then Shem. You have Adam, and then Seth. This is Aboriginal people regularly engage in this behavior. They regularly pass down the priesthood. This was typical. This was normal. This was regular. This was not, it almost goes without saying. Of course you're going to pass down the priesthood. And what do? You train your people. Even in the Kebra it discusses how the firstborn of all of Solomon's executive group are the ones that he sent with David the son to Baltimore to be king. And then after that, they always had male kings. So this is a regular transmission. Everyone knows this, not just chief, but all of the officers. When an officer dies, the person they will elect a successor, so that the office does not die with that person. The person would have known that, and the successor would have known that. In some cases, it was the oldest child who was prepared and groomed to be the successor. In some cases, the oldest child was not capable of being the successor, and so they would find another successor. They already knew they had to, because they didn't want the office to die with them. All right. Next followed a provision hardly of so that's the first and most important thing. That's the very first rule they had. The office does not die with the chief. Most important rule. Number one. Okay. Next followed a provision of hardly less importance. The wars among the Indian tribes arise almost always from individual murders. What does that sound like? How do gang beef start? For real, where does the gang beef come from? Does it come from drive-by shootings at groups of people? Or does it happen when you killed someone, a top leader, and then the next thing you know, people are fighting over that, okay? But we used to have a way of dealing with this. Continue listening. The killing of a tribesman by the members of another community concerns his whole people. If satisfaction is not promptly made, war follows as a matter of course. So naturally, it's going to lead to a fight, right? The founders of the Iroquois Commonwealth decreed that wars for this cause should not be allowed to rise between any of their cantons. So they said, we cannot fight over this. This because one person was murdered, we cannot fight over this. What this did psychologically for our people is that we understood that just because one person was murdered, that was not a reason to go to war. Psychologically, that is inside of us. And there's a group of people who still pretty much carry themselves in that way today. They look for peace at all costs. Now, there's another group of people who don't look for peace at all costs, and they're not just the invaders from the southern border. You also have a group of people that's from another continent that look very much like us, that do not wish to have peace at all costs, that are not willing to overlook the murder of one of their people and go on in peace. And these people, to me, in my perspective, are the ones who push the ones who do look like us, who may not know better, into all of this very, very violent protesting that's done. And all the protesting is not violent, but the violent protesting, the ones that end in damage and wreckage and basically the wars. These are the ones that incite our people to war, because we naturally will fight when one of ours is killed. But that is not how we traditionally handled things. We traditionally sought peace. Okay? On this point, a special charge was given to the members of the Great Council. They were enjoined in figurative language employed throughout the book. Enjoined. Enjoined is a legal term, though. Let's see what that term means. Let's just make sure, because they say they use it throughout the book. Okay, so enjoined is to direct, require, command, or admonish. And it's also something that is it's something that is urgent. It needs to be done quickly. You must quickly respond to this, okay? Now you maybe understand Al Sharpton and the like, and how they respond to things. They were enjoined in figurative language employed throughout the book not to allow the murder to be discussed in a national assembly where the exasperation of the young men might lead to mischief, but to reserve it for their own consideration. And they were required as soon as possible to bury all animosities that might arise from it. So what did they do? They said, okay, we don't need to get in front of all of our young, virile, fighting men that want to avenge this person's death and talk about this. What we need to do is go in the background, squash this beef personally, one-on-one, the best way that we can. And not get the young men riled up. Why? When you get the young men riled up, you know that they're going to be prone to violence. It's almost like someone knows how a certain group of people is going to respond to things, and they've literally been targeting how we naturally respond to things, so that you will have a response to that is unnatural, that is unlawful, to evoke an unlawful response to a situation. It's almost like people knew this, and they knew who it would work on, because it only works on a certain group of people. The figure employed is impressive. They were to uproot a huge pine tree, the well-known emblem of their league, disclosing a deep cavity below which an underground stream would swiftly flowing. Did you know streams flew underground of pine trees? You know you can find water by finding a pine tree? Just an aside. Into this current, they were to cast the cause of the trouble, and then, replacing the tree, hide the mischief forever from their people. You know who else did this? I can think of a story. Okay. Solomon did this. This is what Solomon did when they found out that David the son and all the firstborn took the Ark of the Covenant. They said, okay, we're not going to tell the people. We're just going to build the temple instead. And we're not going to tell the people what happened, so that the people never know that the Ark of the Covenant was taken from a certain place and brought to another certain place. Just saying. How strict in spirit these injunctions were followed, and with what good effect, their whole history shows. A notable instance of the readiness and ingenuity of their statesmen in finding the means of a public reconciliation in such cases is given in the Jesuit narrative. On the 24th day of July, 1657, a great council was held at Onondaga to consider three matters, all of special import. First in order was the necessity of appeasing a threatened quarrel between two of the leading nations, the Senecas and the Caniengas, caused by a misadventure in which a Seneca captain, quote unquote, had been killed by some warriors of the eastern nation. Next in importance was the reception of a large party of Frenchmen, headed by Father Francis Le Mercier, the superior of the Jesuit missionaries in Canada, who had come from a settlement among the Iroquois. And finally, they had to prepare the plan and before the means for an expedition against some hostile tribes. Before the meeting of the council, the Frenchmen had paid a formal visit to the Seneca delegates, whom they found filling the air with songs of mourning for their slaughtered chief, and had manifested their sympathy by a present to alleviate the grief of the mourners. This incident seems to have suggested to the assembled counselors a method of effecting, or at least announcing, the desired accommodation and paying at the same time a happy compliment to their reverend visitors. By common consent, the affair was referred to the arbitrament by Father Superior, by whom the difference was promptly settled. It was not necessary for the politic senators to inform their gratified visitors that the performance in which they thus took part was merely a formality which ratified, or rather proclaimed, a foregone conclusion. The reconciliation, which was prescribed by their constitution, had undoubtedly been arranged by previous conferences, after their customs and such manners, before the meeting of the council. So effective was this provision that their constitution, that for more than 3 centuries this main cause of Indian wars was rendered innocuous, and the great peace remained undisturbed. Do you hear this? By handling this privately and having it all set up how you're going to respond, and not, getting the people, George Floyd his golden casket and having the thing, you guaranteed that you were going to have peace. This is what we did. We squashed it. Before it even got out of hand, people were already responding. The debts were being paid. Everything was cleared out. And they were moving on. Okay? They just had the ceremonies because that's how our people we always have ceremonies. We celebrate everything. So, again, you're forfeiting your inheritance. When you just dip out on all of these different celebrations, they mean something. Okay? This proud averment of their annalists, confirmed as it is for more than half the period by the evidence of their white neighbors, cannot reasonably question. Meaning they can't even question it. They had peace. Everyone knew they were at peace. So if they were at peace, explain to me what these Indian wars were about. Who was these people? Never mind. What nation or confederacy of civilized Europe can show an exemption from domestic strife for so long a term? He is asking, we can't even do this in Europe. So how are they able to get this peace by doing this ceremony and all of this stuff? How are they able to get this peace? Why can't we exploit this in our own country? They can. They never have peace. Look at them riding over there. Listen, the difference between Americans who are original to the land and these people who are from other places is our affinity towards peace. You know you're an American if you have an affinity towards peace. This is why I do not reject anyone who declares himself to be an American, because I know they have an affinity towards peace and reconciliation. These people who don't have an affinity towards peace and reconciliation, they're not Americans. They haven't assimilated into our culture. Anyway, the third rule, so that's the second rule. Squash the beef. So the first rule is don't let the office die with the chief. The second rule is squash all beefs. Peace over everything. Now, were they strong? Absolutely. These are warriors. They could fight, which is why they didn't have these things in front of their young men. But what was the thing? Peace over everything, man. Peace above all. Peace through quote unquote strength. This thing is about to go off. Hold on. Y'all, my alarm clock is about to go off. Let me turn it off. Where is it? I'm at PM. Ah! Don't. Here we go. Okay. There we go. All right. All right, let's keep going. The third rule or ordinance which the founders enacted to strengthen the house is of remarkable character. It relates to the mortuary usages of the people, and when these are understood, the great importance of this law becomes apparent. Here we go, y'all. This is it. Y'all not gonna believe this. Among the Indians of the Huron Iroquois family, the ordinary mourning for the dead became exaggerated into customs of the most extravagant character, exhausting the time and strength of the warriors and devouring their substance. The French missionaries have left us an account of these singular usage among the Hurons, some of which excited their respect and others their astonishment. Our savages, they wrote, are in no way savage as regards to the duties which nature herself requires us to render to the dead. How are they calling them savages when they know they have how they're supposed to treat the dead? Just listen to this. You would say that their efforts, their toils, and their commerce had no other end than to amass the means of honoring the departed. Listen to that. Everything they did was to honor the departed. All their wealth, all their everything was to make sure that they sent their departed into the afterlife with what they needed. Ancestor money, anybody? Libations for the ancestors? Listen. They have nothing too precious for this object. To this they devote their robes of skins, their hatchets and wampum in such profusion that you would fancy they made nothing of them. And yet these are the riches of their country. This is what they thought. The white man, these colonizers thought the riches of our country were the stuff. We always saw the riches of our country as our ancestors, our saints, our martyrs. Always. That was the riches of our country. Your inheritance is not going to be found in some wampum and some robes. It's going to be found in the riches of your ancestors. And that's why they have worked so hard to separate us from our ancestors. Because that is where our riches are truly found, in our ancestors. Okay. I'm going to have to hurry up because I have to go. Often in midwinter, you will see them going almost naked, while they have at home laid up in store good and handsome robes, which they keep in reverence for the dead. This is their point of honor. In this, above all, they seek to show themselves magnificent. During the 3 days, now this is the death rites. Let me see how many more pages this is. We might not get through all of this because I have to go. We'll see how far we can get. During the 3 days that precede the burial of the dead, or the removal of his remains to the scaffold, the wails, groans, and lamentations of the relatives and neighbors resounded in the cabin where he lay. All the stored riches were brought forth and lavished in gifts to comfort the mourners. The mourning did not end with the burial. In fact, it may be said to have then only begun. The quote-unquote great mourning, as the missionaries term it, lasted for 6 days or longer, which the mourners lay face downward upon their mats and enveloped their robes, speechless or replying only by an ejaculation to those who addressed them. This does not sound like the weeping and wailing and the dusting of the head and all of that. How could they not see the similarities? I'm just going to stop at the end of the page. How could they not see the similarities between this and the mourning process of the Jews? I don't get it. Like, I read this for 5 minutes and I'm like, this is exactly what the Jewish mourning process is. They didn't want to see it because they can't explain how these quote unquote savages had these rituals. How did they have these rituals? Where did they come from? You got to think about what happened first. What came first? Who came first? What direction things were going? You got to think about it. Okay. During this period, they had no fire in the house. Even in winter, they ate their food cold, and they left the cabin only at night and as secretly as possible. The lesser mourning, quote unquote, lasted for a year, during which they refrained from oiling their hair. By the way, who needs to oil their hair? What group of people has to oil their hair? Sorry. Attending public festivals rarely and only in the case of women when their mothers ordered were forbidden to marry again. I'm going to stop at the end of this page and we're going to continue this. But this is enough to think about. Look how important this mourning process was. Our heritage, our inheritance is our ancestors. The blood that they sacrificed, their death, what they've done for us, that is our actual heritage. That is our actual inheritance. And until you see the value in your passed on loved ones, you will not see the value of your inheritance. And look what they did. They gave everything when these people died. They gave them everything. We're going to see on the next page exactly how this was carried out. But this is part one. We're going to come back to the laws of the league. We're going to come back to this and do a part two and cover the other pages and maybe a few other things that are in this book that I found interesting. So shalom everyone, and we will see you in the next video.